Thank you. Okay, first slide, please. Next slide. So my name's Donna Ockenden. Thank you for the introduction. Alongside my current role as chair of the Nottingham Review, I'm absolutely delighted to be able to support some major charities in the field of maternity safety, both of whom I'm sure you'll have heard of. Baby Lifeline, I'm their honorary president, and I am a patron of Mama Academy too. So next slide, please. So I feel privileged to talk to multi-professional maternity team members and families every week, in fact, most days of the week. And I think all of us who have any connection with maternity services will know that these are the current challenges. Next slide, please. There you see Cinderella. She's lying by the side of a cold fireplace. She's got raggy clothes and wooden shoes. And essentially, maternity services for far too long have been the Cinderella of the NHS. We weren't A&E, we weren't cancer, we weren't 18 weeks, we were just maternity. And often we slipped out of sight. There's a phrase that was used, maternity consumed their own smoke. We didn't make a fuss about workforce shortages, and if we did, we weren't listened to. Next slide, please. But the issues with insufficient workforce, I think, have gained greater attention than ever before. These are recently published reports. They talk about the state of the medical workforce. They talk about policy announcements from the Royal College of Midwives, the Nursing and Midwifery Council. I think a positive issue is that these challenges are finally coming to light. So it's, in a sense, no more consuming our own smoke. Next slide, please. Now, these are just some of the numbers, and whichever way we look at the numbers, they are currently going the wrong way. And wherever you look for those numbers, you will find they are going the wrong way. So two issues that I wanted to raise is significant difficulty in filling leadership roles, heads of, directors of midwifery posts. And when you are unable to fill that leadership role in an NHS trust, and there are many interims as we speak, you lose an awful lot of local knowledge. Heads of midwifery, I was a head of midwifery for 15 plus years. You gain a huge amount of knowledge about the families in your catchment area and what needs to be done. We also know that when medical leaders, really good consultant obstetricians, consultant neonatologists raise their heads above the parapet to take on leadership roles, they find that because of the lack of resource and time, that's often impossible. I have a really treasured colleague who last year phoned me up and said, Don, maternity governance has broken me. I cannot do it anymore. And in that particular trust, no other obstetrician came forward to take on that important role. And that led to a further burden on the shoulders of the head of midwifery. So next slide, please. And again, and then keep clicking, please, so that we get all of the lines up. Okay, so essentially, births are still going down. The births that we see at the moment are still below the pre-COVID figure, but it's the acuity is going up. So carry on and click, please. Essentially, what we have is a workforce that is exhausted. We aren't able to meet the needs of maternity staff on the front line. So I hear of staff who say in a 12-hour shift, but often they're 13 and 13 and a half hours because of lack of breaks. You can't even go to the toilet. We're really not meeting the needs of the people who are there on the front line. And of course, we know that everything that should have happened pre-COVID has been magnified by what then happened during COVID. And I talk to consultant obstetricians who describe their days on the labour ward as a firefighting day. They talk really warmly of the excellent working relationships between midwives and obstetricians, but that staff shortages are impacting on the provision of clinical care. So next slide, please. We know that alongside the workforce issues, there is a growing complexity and acuity of women. And, you know, there's a statistic that 50% of all GP appointments in England are related to long-term health problems. So this is how we experience maternity services on the front line. Next slide, please. And of course, maternity services is not an island. We can't kind of pretend that what is happening in wider society doesn't affect our maternity services. Of course it does. So we've got growing inequalities. We've got inequalities between white women, Black, Asian, minority, ethnic women. And we've now got the reality of women who will come to our antenatal clinics having to make choices between heat and eat. The Trussell Trust, who run food banks across the country, are actually saying that they may not be able to provide food parcels to everyone in need this winter. So remember that maternity services are not an island. Everything that is happening in our society is actually coming into our antenatal clinics. And I know that there are women who are coming to antenatal clinic appointments who have had to do without breakfast and lunch. Next slide, please. And keep clicking, please. And just that's it, perfect. Okay, so we know that there's been a decade or more of underfunding. And again, whichever way you look at the numbers, you know, the answers are there. The maternity services, through consuming its own smoke, through being the Cinderella service, has been significantly underfunded. But following the publication of our first report in December 2020, there was some good news. £95 million was announced by NHS England in March 2021. And this was recurring funds. This is going to come into NHS trusts every year. And then just the week before we published our report in March, another £127 million spending increase for maternity, not, I believe, entirely recurring. So this is money for capital projects. So it's a significant stride in the right direction. So going back to our picture of Cinderella, I do think that we are turning a tide here, but please note that the Health and Select Committee report back in July 2021, an excellent report if you haven't read it, on maternity safety, said that there had to be up to £350 million with immediate effect. And we didn't redo those sums, just to be clear, we supported this view. Next slide, please. So there is a way forward, we believe, through the challenges. Firstly, on the day of publication, the then Secretary of State made a statement in the House of Commons endorsing all of the findings. So without hesitation, without maybes or we hope, he endorsed all the findings. But the question I ask all NHS Trust, all midwives, all doctors, anyone that I meet, we need to be really clear that the genesis of this report was because two brave families came forward and raised concerns 7 years apart. Kate died in 2009 and Pippa died in 2016. Why did it take two remarkable sets of bereaved parents? And every trust and every ICB and every structure, NHS structure across the UK should ask themselves that question. Could it happen here? Next slide, please. So we came up with 15 immediate and essential actions for all maternity services in England. And if I can say to you that our report was entirely clinically led, every chapter had a multi-professional midwife and obstetrician lead. Every IEA, note immediate and essential actions, no recommendations in any Ockenden report. Everything, was clinically led and tested out multiple times before it actually appeared in the report. So firstly, workforce planning and sustainability and financing are key. And then coming out of that, there are several issues that we need to look at. And these are just some of the themes that come out of those immediate and essential actions. Next, please. So There are absolutely now an essential role for trust boards in oversight of their maternity services. So this is really, really important. Local accountability. The chief executive, the medical director, the nursing director need to be absolutely responsible and accountable for their maternity services. They need to work closely with their local maternity leadership team. It's not enough to say, I did not know, I did not understand. So very, very key there. And of course, what we saw in Shrewsbury was a lack of family involvement and a lack of staff engagement and practice changes that either didn't get introduced or got introduced far too late. And this must change. We looked in detail at maternal deaths, and we found rather than joined up investigation and learning, chopped up investigation and learning. And for some families, the work of our team was the first time that they actually found out in full what happened to their relative. And then focusing on the college-led steering board, the RCM and the RCOG and the other various Royal Colleges have got tens of thousands of frontline members who can be used, you know, as a real resource in understanding maternity services. So the college-led steering board for the maternity transformation programme has been set up, has had its first meeting, and I think will be a really valuable tool going forward. So we're really glad that we recommended that, said it was an immediately essential action, and here we are just a few months down the line from publication, and that has happened. Next, please. This is just some of the headlines. There were, as you may have seen, hundreds of headlines around both Shrewsbury and Telford. The fact that at the end of May, I was appointed to Nottingham. But of course, what we mustn't forget is, of course, that there is a report forthcoming shortly on East Kent. And again, grandfather's quest for truth over baby deaths at Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother Hospital. That is Derek Richford. He's the granddad of baby Harry. So yet again, what we've got is a theme of families needing to push, you know, for these inquiries, and that simply mustn't happen going forward. Next, please. So what is now happening? While Ockenden is busy with her very large multi-professional team in Nottingham, what's happening to that final report? So all trusts have completed a board assurance tool. They all know where they need to take action. And very, very importantly, significant financial investment needs to follow. It is the #1 priority. Workforce planning and appropriate levels of funding are the #1 priority. There are 15 IEAs. Without workforce and money, which is IEA #1, we simply will not achieve IEAs 2 to 15. And next, please. And finally, you know, we must listen to staff on the ground. One of the things we'll be doing in Nottingham is starting pretty early, listening to staff voices, because we know that often staff on the ground know the issues and they have the solutions, or they have some of the solutions, if only they were listened to. So the first quote here is from Shrewsbury. And I think that what I would pick out of that first quote is that this member of staff is asking for robust and independent places for clinicians to speak out without fearing reprisals. These are current, these are quotes from 2022. And then the second one is elsewhere in the country. And this person on the front line talks about unbearable challenges, loving their professions, but needing change quickly enough to keep midwives and doctors in their profession. Next, please. But we are in a really difficult situation in maternity services, and talking to staff and families as I do, I know that this is a particularly tough time, whatever anyone's role. However, I do believe that there is a brighter future ahead. Next slide, please. So the take-home message I would share with all of you is that the pressure on maternity services have been magnified by the COVID pandemic, without a doubt. But this pressure has built for more than a decade. This isn't something that happened immediately pre-COVID or happened because of COVID. And it is my firm belief that the greater attention and spotlight on maternity services, the greater knowledge that everyone now has from the top of government down, means that for maternity services, we are now thankfully becoming a better kind of Cinderella.